The lunch shift at Elena's trattoria was always loud. Pans clattering, orders shouted, knives hitting cutting boards like steady heartbeats of steel. Yet in the middle of all that noise stood Maria Delgado, as silent as the space between breaths. She moved through the narrow Brooklyn kitchen like a thin stream of smoke, seen but rarely questioned, present yet almost intangible. The others rushed, cursed, laughed, and complained. Maria simply worked. Her hands were a blur as she sliced onions into paper-thin crescents, each piece identical to the next. Her expression remained serene, brows relaxed, though every sense was awake. The kitchen was a storm, but she had learned long ago to live inside storms without drowning. She was born mute, a condition doctors explained in technical terms that didn't matter much to her mother, who had raised her in the border town of El Paso with a mixture of fierce love and even fiercer resignation. "You will speak with your hands," her mother used to say, brushing Maria's hair behind her ear as if tucking away the world's judgment. "And when hands are not enough, your eyes will tell the truth." Maria believed that. Maybe she believed it too much. After her mother's death and the slow unraveling of anything that resembled stability, Maria drifted across states until New York swallowed her whole. She found Elena's trattoria by accident, stepping in from the cold one night when the city seemed to spit sleet like needles. She had only meant to ask for shelter or maybe leftover bread, but Elena, with her storm-colored eyes and voice roughened by years of hard work, saw something in her. A lost bird, maybe, a wounded stray, or perhaps simply a pair of hands willing to work. "You don't talk," Elena had asked, her tone cautious but not unkind. Maria shook her head. "But you want a job?" Maria nodded, and just like that, she became part of the kitchen. Most of the staff didn't know how to communicate with someone who couldn't speak, so they kept their exchanges practical, pointing, gesturing, waving. Maria didn't mind. Words had never been her stronghold anyway. The quiet suited her, but not everyone kept their distance. Sophie, Elena's 8-year-old daughter, had the curiosity of a firecracker and the boldness of a newly sharpened blade. She watched Maria with bright eyes that saw far too much. "Can you teach me how to say my name with your hands?" she had asked one afternoon, fingers sticky with gelato as she tugged on Maria's apron. Maria nodded, wiping the child's hands first before demonstrating the smooth S shape, followed by the gentle twist that spelled PHI in simplified sign. Sophie mimicked, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, and Maria laughed without sound, shoulders shaking lightly, eyes shining. From then on, Sophie followed her around whenever she could, and Maria, who rarely allowed anyone inside the quiet chamber of her world, found herself letting the little girl in without resistance. Maybe it was because Sophie didn't treat her like a puzzle missing pieces. She treated her like a person who simply spoke differently. Everything could have continued in that peaceful rhythm if not for the arrival of Vince Russo. Vince appeared one chilly November evening, sliding into the restaurant like someone who believed doors opened only for him. He had dark hair gelled back too carefully, a smile that sharpened the edges, and the kind of presence that made people unconsciously adjust their posture. Elena had introduced him as a friend, but soon enough the staff whispered boyfriend behind her back. Maria didn't like him from the start. It wasn't the way he dressed, expensive leather shoes that didn't match a neighborhood Italian joint. It wasn't even the way he treated Elena, hovering with a charm that felt rehearsed. No, what unsettled her was the way he looked around the kitchen as if memorizing exits, the way his voice softened when speaking to Elena but hardened when ordering staff around, the way his eyes followed Sophie just a second too long whenever the girl passed by. Maria had seen men like him before, not in New York, but back home, where danger sometimes wore cologne and smiled before it struck. Still, she kept her distance, offering no more than what her job required. Vince barely acknowledged her anyway. A girl who couldn't speak was, in his eyes, as harmless as a mop leaning against a wall. Invisible. That invisibility was the only reason Maria overheard the first warning. It was late. The restaurant had closed an hour earlier. Most staff had gone home, leaving the kitchen quiet except for the hum of refrigerators. Maria was wiping down counters when she noticed a faint light flickering beneath the office door. Elena must have forgotten to turn it off. Maria walked past the dry storage racks toward it, intending to switch it off, but froze when she heard voices. "You said tomorrow night. I need to know the timing," Vince hissed. Maria's pulse quickened. Another voice, deeper, rougher, answered, "Car's set. Alley's clear. Just make sure the kid's in the back hallway." "Kid." Maria frowned, dread creeping up her spine. "She'll be there," Vince said. "Elena always sends her to get her coat around 8. Maria leaned closer, heart pounding so loudly she feared they would hear it. Cold spilled through her veins like melting ice. They were planning something involving Sophie. The voices dropped to a low murmur. Maria stepped back, breath trembling, and fled before she could hear more. The mop bucket rattled as she pushed it aside, but she forced herself to continue cleaning. If Vince or the other man walked out and saw her lingering, they might grow suspicious. For the next week, Maria watched everything with new eyes. Vince hovered more. He took phone calls outside, returning with the restlessness of a man waiting for a countdown to finish. The same rough-voiced man she heard that night visited the restaurant twice, pretending to check out the new seasonal menu. But every time Maria glimpsed him, he was scanning the interior, noting security cameras, measuring distances. She wanted to tell Elena. She wanted to shout with every fiber of her being, but her voice didn't exist. And she feared that without concrete evidence, Elena might dismiss her concerns. Worse, mention them to Vince. The more Maria observed, the more tightly fear coiled around her. She barely slept, lying awake with her heart pounding against her ribs like someone trapped behind a locked door. Yet she said nothing, because she couldn't. On a strangely warm afternoon in early December, the streets outside bustled with holiday shoppers. Inside the kitchen, Maria chopped garlic while the savory scent of simmering marinara filled the air. Sophie was perched on a stool by the counter, drawing with crayons. She looked up occasionally to show Maria her sketches, mostly cats, stars, and heroic stick figures with capes. "Look, Maria, this one is you." She lifted a paper with a figure wearing an apron and holding a ladle like a sword. Maria placed a hand on her chest, feigning shock, then clasped her palms together in a silent thank you. Sophie giggled. At that moment, Vince stepped in. His gaze flicked from Sophie to Maria, landing on the drawing. "That's cute," he said, voice unusually light. "But Maria's busy. Go on out to the dining room. Sweetheart." Sophie hugged her drawing to her chest and skipped away. Maria felt Vince's eyes lingering on her. She kept chopping. "Good with kids, aren't you?" he said. She didn't lift her head. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Elena trusts you a lot." Maria's knife paused for a fraction of a second, a sliver of hesitation Vince noticed. He smirked. "Keep it that way," he murmured before leaving. The knife trembled slightly when Maria picked it up again. 2 days later, it happened. The afternoon shift had just begun. Maria was in the walk-in cooler organizing produce crates. Frost clung to metal shelves like thin lace. Her breath fogged the air in front of her. She reached for a crate of tomatoes when a soft sniffle pierced the silence. She turned. There, behind stacked boxes, Sophie sat with her knees hugged to her chest, tears streaking her face. Maria gasped silently and hurried over, kneeling beside the girl. Her hands fluttered in frantic question. Sophie wiped her nose. I don't know where Mom is. Vince told me to wait here. I don't want to. It's cold, and I'm scared." Maria wrapped an arm around her gently, rubbing her back. She tilted Sophie's chin to check her face. Only fear, no injuries. Relief washed through her. But then another sound entered the cooler. Footsteps. 2 men talking outside, one voice unmistakable. "Vince." Maria stiffened, instinct pressing her to hide the child. With quick movements, she guided Sophie deeper behind the crates, placing a finger to her lips. Sophie nodded, curling into a ball. Maria turned toward the door. The voices became clearer, Vince and the rough-voiced man. "She's in the cooler?" the man asked. "Yeah, told her to wait," Vince replied. "When the alley is empty, we take her straight out. Elena won't even know she's gone until we're across the bridge." Maria's breath stopped. The realization crashed like a wave. They weren't waiting for tomorrow. They were taking Sophie now. The cooler door handle jiggled. Maria darted behind a tall stack of produce just as it creaked open. Vince stepped inside, scanning the space. Maria pressed her back against the metal shelves, cold biting into her skin. Kid must have wandered. The other man muttered behind him. Vince swore under his breath. Find her. Maria grasped a crate, ready to throw it if she needed distraction. But the men left, closing the door again, and their footsteps faded. Maria hurried back to Sophie and signed urgently. We must go. Now. Sophie nodded, eyes wide. Maria cracked the cooler door open and peeked into the corridor. Empty. She tugged Sophie's hand and led her out. But as they neared the kitchen, a shadow blocked the doorway. Vince. His gaze flicked from Sophie to Maria, and recognition sparked like lightning. Where do you think you're taking her? He snarled. Sophie hid behind Maria's legs. Maria straightened, meeting his glare with icy stillness. Vince stepped closer. So that's it. You've been snooping. Maria shook her head quickly, tried to appear apologetic, harmless, confused. Anything to defuse him. Her fingers fluttered in useless explanation, but her racing heart betrayed her. He didn't buy it. You don't talk, he said softly, dangerously. But maybe you heard, and that makes you a problem. Maria tightened her arm around Sophie protectively. Vince leaned in until she could smell the mint on his breath. Take her to Elena and I'll... But his threat was cut short when the front door slammed open, someone calling for help. A customer had slipped outside on the icy sidewalk. The commotion pulled Vince's attention for one crucial second. Maria used that second. She pushed Sophie into the employee bathroom and shut the door quietly. Then she stepped back into the kitchen, pretending to fetch towels, hoping to draw suspicion away from Sophie's hiding place. Vince glared but said nothing. He followed the others to assist the injured customer. Maria exhaled, barely, softly. But this wasn't over. It had only begun. She wiped her shaking hands on her apron and returned to work, but her eyes remained restless, scanning every exit, every shadow. The kitchen no longer felt safe. The whole restaurant no longer felt safe. And the child she had come to care for more than she ever expected was now a target. Maria had no voice, but she had resolve. And resolve was the sharpest weapon she had ever carried. She had to protect Sophie, no matter what. But as daylight faded and the dinner crowd filtered in, Maria sensed that the danger looming over them was closer than ever. And Chapter 2 would begin with the moment everything she feared came crashing into reality, as one wrong step in the kitchen led Maria straight into the jaws of the men who had plans far darker than anyone imagined. The evening rush swept into Elena's Trois like a tide. People wrapped in winter coats, shoulders dusted with snowflakes, laughter spilling into the air with the smell of garlic and rosemary. The room glowed under warm lights as Christmas songs played softly from hidden speakers. It should have felt festive, comforting, ordinary. But Maria felt none of that warmth, none of that holiday softness. The kitchen heat seemed distant, the clatter of dishes muffled, as if every sound was wrapped in wool. Her senses were too sharply attuned to danger to let anything else through. She couldn't stop thinking about Sophie locked inside the employee bathroom earlier, about Vince's eyes narrowing with suspicion, about the voices she had overheard in the walk-in cooler. The shadows hanging over the restaurant no longer felt like harmless parts of the building. They felt like living things creeping closer. She continued chopping parsley near the prep station, but her gaze drifted toward the back hallway every few seconds. Whenever the kitchen door swung open and cold air rushed in, she scanned the movement with the alertness of someone who expected a threat to appear at any moment. Her knife tapped out a rhythmic beat, steady calm, betraying none of the tension tightening her chest. Marco, the head chef, glanced at her. "You okay?" he asked, waving a spoon dripping with tomato sauce. "You look pale as flour." Maria forced a smile, short, polite, nothing more. She gestured toward the steaming pasta pot, a subtle way of suggesting she was just focused on work. Marco shrugged and returned to yelling at an apprentice who had forgotten to salt the water. The noise helped keep the illusion that everything was normal, but Maria's pulse refused to slow. Just then, The kitchen door opened and Sophie appeared, bundled in a red sweater and knitted scarf, skipping a little as if she hadn't been trembling with fear only hours ago. She spotted Maria instantly and ran to her side, clutching a small envelope. "Mom said you need this," she chirped, holding it out. Maria wiped her hands on her apron before taking it. Inside was a grocery list. Elena wanted someone to pick up fresh basil from the corner market because their supplier had delivered wilted bunches earlier. Maria nodded and signed softly to Sophie. "Thank you. Are you all right?" Sophie nodded, though her eyes flicked uncertainly toward the doorway as if half expecting Vince to appear. "Mom said I can help with decorating cookies later," she whispered. "She said I can stay in the front with her for a while." Maria placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder and squeezed gently before Sophie skipped away, her little boots squeaking on the tiles. For a moment, relief warmed Maria's ribs. If Sophie was with Elena, she was safer than before, but not completely safe. Not with Vince still lurking somewhere in the building. When she glanced across the dining room through the past window, she saw him, the leather-clad figure leaning against the bar counter, swirling a drink. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes were anything but. He scanned the room the way a hunter scans a field, waiting for the right moment to strike. Maria swallowed hard and returned the grocery list to her apron pocket. She needed to get the basil quickly and come back. She didn't want to leave Sophie inside for long, even with Elena nearby. She retrieved her coat and pushed the back door open, stepping into the frigid December night. Snow danced under the street lamps. The alley behind the restaurant stretched like a dark corridor between brick buildings, dumpsters lined up against the walls. Maria usually hated walking alone at night, but tonight she had no choice. She hurried toward the market on the corner, her boots crunching on thin ice. As she reached the sidewalk, the evening air hit her like a slap, sharp biting in, flooded with city scents. Roasted chestnut from a street vendor, the metallic tang of passing cars, the faint sweetness of bakery pastries. She rushed through the small market, selecting the basil quickly, but while waiting in line, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. When she stepped back outside, she paused. The street was crowded enough to feel safe, but that didn't ease the tightness in her chest. She held the basil close and began her walk back, her breath puffing out in white clouds. As she neared the alley again, she saw movement, a silhouette tucked behind a dumpster. She froze, heart thudding painfully. But when the figure stepped forward, she recognized one of the dishwasher boys from the restaurant taking a smoke break. He nodded at her, oblivious to the panic he'd caused. Maria exhaled shakily and continued walking. But the moment she turned into the alley, she felt it, an abrupt shift in the air, like a trap snapping shut. Two men were standing near the restaurant's back door. Vince's broad frame and dark coat were unmistakable. Beside him stood the rough-voiced man Maria had overheard before. Their conversation stopped the instant they saw her. Maria stiffened. Her fist tightened around a bag of basil. "Look who we have here," the rough man murmured, his tone sharp enough to carve through the cold. Vince stepped forward, hands in his pockets, a smile spreading across his face. But it was a kind of smile that curled around a knife blade. Maria, out running errands? She clutched the bag tighter, fighting to keep her expression neutral. Vince moved closer, and the other man flanked him. The alley felt narrower, darker, as if the brick walls were leaning inward. "You're always watching people," Vince said softly. "Always sneaking around like some kind of little ghost." He tilted his head. "Makes me wonder what you've heard." Maria shook her head vigorously. Her hands trembled as she signed. "I don't know anything." Vince's eyes flashed with amusement. Dangerous, merciless amusement. "See, I don't believe that." He leaned closer. "And that's a problem." Maria took a step back, only to feel her back touch cold brick. The men closed in, blocking her escape to the sidewalk and the restaurant door. "You should have stayed in the kitchen," the rough man said, cracking his knuckles. "Now we gotta figure out if you're gonna ruin things." Maria's heart raced. She thought of Sophie, her small hands, her brave eyes, her trembling voice in the cooler. She couldn't let anything happen to Sophie, and she couldn't let these men think she would interfere. She lifted her hands again, signing desperately. I won't tell anyone. I swear. Vince smirked. Of course you won't. You can't. He tapped a finger against her throat mockingly. Convenient. The rough man chuckled, stepping closer as if ready to grab her. Maria's mind raced. She needed to escape. She needed to warn Elena. She needed... A sudden slam echoed behind them. The restaurant's back door burst open and Marco stumbled out, yelling into the alley. Maria, did you find the basil, or what? Elena needs it now. The two men jerked back in surprise. Maria didn't hesitate. She shoved past Vince with all her strength, darting toward the door. The rough man reached out, his fingers grazing her coat, but she slipped away and sprinted inside before they could grab her. Marco blinked at her. Whoa, calm down, he laughed. Cold out there? Maria nodded rapidly, dropping the basil onto the counter. Her hand shook uncontrollably. Marco frowned, confused, but she rushed back into the kitchen before he could question her further. Once inside, the warmth of the kitchen almost made her dizzy. She steadied herself against the counter, gulping air, trying to slow the frantic thudding of her heart. She scanned the restaurant through the past window. Sophie was still at the front with Elena, decorating cookies on a tray. The child's laughter rose above the clinking of glasses and the chatter of customers. She looked safe, protected, for now. Maria wiped a trembling hand across her forehead, feeling sweat and cold mix unpleasantly. She had to stay close to Sophie. She had to keep watch. Vince and the other man could act at any moment, and she couldn't be caught off guard again. She returned to the kitchen slowly, moving from station to station, pretending to focus on her tasks while her eyes flicked constantly toward the front of the house. The kitchen bustle was loud, pans sizzling, orders shouted, but Maria heard none of the way others did. Her mind was running, a silent storm of worry and calculations. Her instincts screamed that tonight was a night. Everything in Vince's posture, his shadows, his tone, it all pointed to something imminent, but she didn't know when or how. She only knew she had to be ready. Time moved differently when fear tightened around your ribs. Moments stretched and twisted. The minutes between Sophie's giggles felt like eternities. Each time the kitchen door swung open and cold air rushed in, Maria looked up sharply. Every time a customer walked toward the bathroom hallway, her pulse spiked. And then, slowly, a shape appeared beside the bar, Vince again. But this time he wasn't drinking. He was watching Sophie. Or rather, he was waiting for something, for someone. Maria moved closer to the past window, wiping her hands on her apron to disguise her anxiety. She needed to be able to reach Sophie if something went wrong. But Vince didn't move. Not yet. He stood there, tapping his fingers on the counter, looking too calm, too collected. He was waiting for the right moment. Maria's chest tightened. She glanced toward the exit, toward the corridor, toward every shadow Vince could use to separate Sophie from the crowd. Then everything happened at once. A sudden blackout flickered across the restaurant, lights dimming for a split second before coming back. The customers murmured in confusion. The waitstaff looked around. It was nothing, but Maria knew better. She felt in the shift of Vince's posture, in the glance he exchanged with a man at a nearby table, a face she recognized from the alley, in the way the room seemed to fall under a hush even as sound continued around her. He was making his move. Maria dropped the dish she was holding, ceramic shattering on the tile, and ran. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She darted out of the kitchen, ignoring Marco's startled shout behind her, weaving through tables, bumping into chairs, sliding past servers carrying trays. The dining room blurred as her focus locked on the tiny figure in the red sweater. Sophie. Maria's heart slammed against her ribs as she reached the girl just as Vince stood from the bar, taking one step too many in her direction. Maria arrived like a shield, pulling Sophie close, her eyes blazing silently at Vince. He froze. The message was clear. Not her. Not tonight. Not ever. But the danger was far from over, because somewhere in the building, maybe in the hallway, maybe near the back entrance, the other man was waiting too, and Maria knew she had only seconds to stop what was coming. The night was about to erupt, and Chapter 3 would begin where safety ended. when the kitchen itself became a battlefield and Maria was forced to face the men head-on, with nothing but her silence and her courage as weapons. For one suspended instant, the entire restaurant seemed to freeze. Forks hovered above plates, voices stalled mid-sentence, and the warm glow of the dining room lights cast long shadows across the wooden floorboards. Maria held Sophie against her chest, the child's small heartbeat thudding rapidly beneath layers of wool. Her own chest tightened with fear, but her eyes, wide, burning, defiant, never left Vince's face. He had taken one step toward Sophie before Maria reached her, but now he stood utterly still, his jaw locked, expression twitching with calculations he had not expected to make tonight. People were around them, far too many witnesses. The timing had been off. He knew it. She knew it. But that didn't mean he would give up. Not a man like him. Maria bent slightly, whispering nothing because she had no voice, but her body wrapped around Sophie with unmistakable urgency. Elena, still occupied near the front counter of the customer dispute, hadn't noticed what was happening behind her. The restaurant hummed with oblivious life, unaware that the moment hung by a single fraying thread. Maria took Sophie's hand and signed quickly, "Stay close. Don't leave me." The child nodded, her big eyes filled with confusion and worry. "Maria, what's wrong?" Maria shook her head, squeezing Sophie's hand tighter. There was no time to explain. Then, abruptly, life roared back into motion. A waiter carrying a tray slipped on a stray napkin. Glasses clattered, customers gasped. The moment broke like fragile glass. And Vince moved. But he didn't lunge. He didn't dare, not with so many eyes now sweeping toward the commotion. Instead, he straightened his jacket, plastered on a smile that looked carved from stone, and stepped casually toward the bar once more. Maria knew that false calm too well. It meant he was adjusting his plan, and he would not delay long. She guided Sophie back toward the kitchen, away from the dining room's exposure. But they had barely reached the swinging door when she sensed someone behind them. A hand brushed the metal frame. Maria tightened her grip on the child. The door swung open, revealing not Vince, but the rough-voiced man she'd seen in the alley. He leaned against the metal frame with the predator's posture, shoulders relaxed but eyes cold and assessing. He looked like he belonged there, as if blending seamlessly into the noise and chaos. Sophie flinched. Maria stepped between them instinctively, blocking the man's view of the child. He didn't speak to her. He spoke past her. "Cute kid," he said softly, almost admiringly. A chill crawled up Maria's spine. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching Sophie the way a buyer studies merchandise. Maria's breath turned sharp in her chest. She had no weapon. She had no voice. She had no time. But she had her body and her will. She ushered Sophie behind her and pushed her gently into the kitchen. The man stepped aside but did not move far, as if testing how far he could press before Maria reacted. And she did react. Her eyes narrowed, her shoulders squared, her stance widening, a silent warning. "Stay back." He smiled faintly as if amused by her courage. "You're quicker than I thought. And smarter." His gaze hardened. Too smart. Maria felt her pulse jump, but she didn't back down. Marco, unaware, called from across the kitchen, "Maria, bring the basil over." She handed Sophie the bag instead, nudging her toward him. Marco took it with a grunt, annoyed but focused on his cooking. He didn't notice the danger at the doorway. The rough man leaned in, whispering so softly only she could hear. "You keep getting in the way. That's a problem. Because the boss wants the girl, and he always gets what he wants." Every instinct inside Maria screamed. She stepped forward and pushed the kitchen door closed in his face, locking eyes with him through the small round window. He stayed there for a beat too long, as if memorizing the exact shape of her fear or her resolve. Then he turned away. Maria spun around, scanning the kitchen for Sophie. The child was by the prep table, helping Marco place cookies onto a tray, brows knitted with worry, but unaware of how close danger had slithered. Maria exhaled shakily. She couldn't let this continue. She needed to warn Elena, somehow. But Elena was distracted, overwhelmed, and, most dangerously, blind to the threat of the man she trusted. Maria moved to Sophie's side, wiping crumbs off the counter. She signed, "Stay near me." Don't leave the kitchen. Don't go with Vince. Promise me. Sophie hesitated but nodded slowly. Okay, I promise. The door swung open again, but this time it was a server delivering tickets. Maria forced herself to move, to keep working, to pretend nothing was wrong while her heart hammered beneath her ribs. But the tension only grew. Minutes stretched into jagged fragments. Orders piled up. Marco shouted commands. The air filled with steam and the scent of butter and garlic. Maria moved like a ghost among them, quiet, efficient, but constantly glancing toward the door. Every sound felt like a trigger, every shadow like an approaching threat. She didn't notice Vince at first, but when she finally did, the world seemed to tilt. He was standing inside the kitchen doorway, leaning one shoulder against the frame, watching her. His expression was unreadable, but his stare was unblinking, heavy, suffocating. No one else noticed. No one looked at him long enough to sense the wrongness. To them, he was just Elena's boyfriend, wandering into the kitchen again like he sometimes did. But Maria knew better. He waited until she noticed him fully before lifting his hand and giving her the slightest beckoning gesture, as if inviting her into a conversation she could never win. Her chest tightened. She shook her head once, a silent refusal. He smiled. Then he walked deeper into the kitchen. Maria froze. He wasn't allowed this far in during service. No customer was. But the staff was too busy, too distracted to stop him. He approached slowly, gracefully, an actor assuming a role. He reached Sophie. Maria moved instantly. She positioned herself between him and the girl, her arms spreading subtly like wings. Sophie stepped back, eyes wide. Marco finally looked up, confusion wrinkling his forehead. "Vince, you need something?" "Nothing urgent," Vince said with disarming charm, though his eyes never left Maria. "Just checking on our little pastry chef here." Sophie's small hand grabbed Maria's apron. Maria glanced at Marco, trying to catch his attention, trying to communicate without words that something was wrong. Marco frowned. "Maria, what's going on?" But before she could respond, the rough man from earlier entered through the back hallway. Marco's attention shifted as he realized the stranger had no reason to be there. "Hey, you can't be in..." He didn't finish. Vince stepped closer to Maria, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "This is happening tonight. Don't make it messy." Maria's blood roared. Without warning, Vince reached past her and grabbed Sophie's wrist. And everything inside Maria snapped. She surged forward, slamming her shoulder into Vince with a force none of them expected. He stumbled back, colliding with rolling cart pans that clattered loudly onto the tile. Sophie broke free and darted behind Marco. Shouts erupted. "What the hell?" "Maria!" "Vince, what are you doing?" But Maria didn't hear them. Her breath pounded, her vision tunneling. She grabbed the nearest thing, a wooden spoon, and held it like a weapon. Vince straightened, fury tearing through every inch of his face. The rough man stepped into the kitchen fully now, closing the space behind him. The alley door was open. The exit was clear. They were about to grab the child in the middle of a working kitchen. Chaos exploded. The server nearest the commotion dropped his tray with shatter of glass. Marco reached for Sophie, pulling her behind him like a shield. The dishwasher backed away, hands raised. Customers began to look toward the kitchen, noticing something was horribly wrong. Vince lunged. Maria shoved a metal tray across the counter, sending it spinning like a shield. He deflected it with his forearm and grabbed her by the arm, twisting harshly. She cried out silently, her mouth opening with no sound. She wrenched away, whipping the spoon toward his hand. It snapped in two, useless. She grabbed the pan instead, swinging it wide, forcing him to duck. The rough man seized Marco, shoving him hard into a shelf. Sophie screamed. Maria darted toward the stove, reaching toward the burner. A risky idea burned in her mind, dangerous, desperate, reckless. But she wasn't thinking anymore. She turned the flame up high, letting the oil in a nearby pot spit and smoke. Vince grabbed her wrist again. She twisted, slipped, grabbed a handful of flour from the nearby bowl and flung it in his face. He cursed, blinded momentarily. Sophie ran from Marco's fallen side toward the back hallway. Maria sprinted after her. The rough man blocked the path. Maria skidded to a stop. He smirked, pulling a knife from his jacket. A small one, sharp, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her stomach dropped, but as he stepped forward, Sophie behind him screamed, "Maria!" And that scream, not the knife, changed everything. Because Marco, dazed but conscious, grabbed a pot and hurled its contents across the floor. Oil splattered beneath the rough man's shoes, and he slipped, falling hard. Maria didn't think. She grabbed Sophie's arm and ran. Vince roared behind them, fighting through the flour-clouded air. The kitchen staff pulled back, screaming, ducking, unsure what to do. Pans crashed. Orders burned. Everything fell apart in a whirlwind of motion and fear. Maria bolted to the hallway, with Sophie clinging to her, but she knew the men were right behind them. Out of breath, heart slamming, she yanked open the small utility closet door and pushed Sophie inside. She knelt, cupping the girl's face, signing frantically, "Stay. Quiet. Don't move. I'll come back. I promise." Sophie's face was streaked with tears. "Maria, don't leave." Maria pressed a finger to her lips and shut the door. Then she ran back toward the kitchen. She was no longer escaping. She was protecting. Vince stormed from the dining room entrance just as she emerged. His eyes were wild, his jaw clenched so tightly she could hear the grind of bone. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he snarled. Maria raised her fists. She had nothing else left. The kitchen erupted again. Marco trying to get up, the dishwasher shouting for someone to call the police, the staff scrambling. But Maria didn't see any of it. She saw Vince, charging like a raging bull. She grabbed a pan off a nearby hook and deflected his swing. The force rattled her wrist, pain shooting up her arm. He grabbed her apron and yanked, slamming her into the counter. She elbowed him in the ribs. He growled and backhanded her, hard enough to send her sprawling onto the floor. But she refused to stay down. She pushed herself up, vision spinning, ears ringing. The rough man reappeared, limping but furious, knife still in hand. Maria's breath caught. He stepped toward her, raising the blade. But before he could strike, a shout rang through the kitchen. Not Marco, not a server, not a customer. Elena. She stood at the door, staring at the chaos, at the knife, at Vince, at Maria bruised and breathless. What the hell is happening? Vince froze. The rough man didn't. He lunged, and Maria was forced to make a choice that would set the restaurant ablaze in more ways than one. As Chapter 4 begins, everything will burn. Fear, loyalty, and the thin line between survival and sacrifice, leading Maria toward a moment where only her silence can save them all. The knife flashed in the fluorescent kitchen light, cold, sharp, and headed straight for Maria. Time contracted around her, compressing the world into the sliver of space between steel and skin. The rough man's face contorted with the brutality of someone who had long ago numbed himself to consequences. His arm whipped forward in a single lethal strike. But Maria moved first. It wasn't elegance or training that pushed her aside. It was instinct, a primal urge to survive for Sophie's sake. Her body twisted. Sliding across the floor as the knife skimmed the sleeve of her coat, slicing the fabric but missing flesh by inches. She crashed into a metal cart, sending bowls clattering, but she didn't stop. She shoved herself up, heart pounding out of rhythm, tasting adrenaline like iron on her tongue. Elena's scream cut through the chaos, raw, trembling, desperate. "Stop it. Stop right now." Vince turned at her voice, the fury draining momentarily from his expression. "Elena, baby, listen, it's not what you think." But Elena had lived long enough, fought hard enough, survived enough heartbreak to recognize the snarl of danger when she saw it. Her gaze swept the room. Marco dazed on the ground, dishes broken, steam rising from abandoned pans, Maria bruised and breathless, and the stranger with a knife. The puzzle pieces assembled themselves into a nightmare. "Vince!" Her voice cracked like a dry branch. "What have you done?" The rough man lunged again, not at Maria this time, but at Elena. Maria didn't think. She didn't breathe. She launched herself forward, slamming into the man's side. The knife clattered across the tile, spinning under a prep table. The man fell hard, cursing as he hit the floor. Vince lunged for the knife, but Maria's foot shot out, kicking it farther away. It skidded into a drain gutter, unreachable without crawling. "Enough!" Elena shouted, stepping back as the kitchen erupted into motion. But Vince didn't stop. He had crossed the threshold, his face red, eyes wild, his composure ripped away. He lunged at Maria again, grabbing the front of her coat and slamming her into the metal fridge. Pain jolted through her back. She gasped silently, her fingers clawing at his grip. His breath was hot and furious against her cheek. "You ruined everything," he snarled. Maria grabbed the first thing she could reach, a metal ladle, and drove it into his ribs. He grunted but tightened his grip. The rough man recovered and began rising from the floor. Elena moved without thinking. She grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the station and swung. The weight connected with the rough man's shoulder, knocking him sideways. He howled in pain. Marco, finally regaining his senses, stumbled toward them, shouting, "Somebody call the police!" He grabbed Vince from behind, but Vince overpowered him easily. Marco hit the ground again. The wind knocked out of him. Steam filled the kitchen. Oil hissed on the hot burners. The scent of burnt garlic mixed with sweat and fear. The room seemed to tilt with the violence erupting inside it. Maria clawed at Vince's arm, trying to break free. He pushed her harder against the fridge, his knuckles digging into her collarbone. She saw black spots flickering at the edge of her vision. But then, a memory burst like lightning through her mind. Sophie, hiding in the closet, whispering, "Maria, don't leave." Fuel ignited in her chest. She brought her knee up sharply, driving it into Vince's thigh. He staggered, loosening his hold. She broke free and darted toward the stove, fumbling for something, anything, useful. Her hand closed around a heavy steel pot. Vince lunged. She swung. The pot collided with his skull, a hollow metallic crack echoing through the room. Vince felt his knees, dazed, eyes rolling, but the rough man was still standing. He charged at Maria, shoving her backward toward the stove. Her elbow hit a knob, accidentally turning a burner. Flames roared upward instantly, licking the edge of a nearby towel. She tried to push away, but the man grabbed her wrists, pinning her arms. "You're dead," he hissed. "I'll deal with the kid later." Maria bucked against him with all her strength. Her eyes darted left. Steam, spoons, pans, right, oil, towels, open flame, danger everywhere. Then she saw it. A container of coarse salt by the stove. Within reach. Her fingers brushed it. She snagged it with the tips of her nails, just enough to yank it down. Salt spilled over the open flame, popping loudly, exploding upward in a burst of sparks that shot toward a man's face. He recoiled instinctively, hands flying up to shield his eyes. Maria didn't hesitate. She drove her knee into his chest. He stumbled. She grabbed a skillet and swung it upward with dizzying force. The sound was sickening. He crashed onto the floor. Breathing hard, Maria staggered backward, chest heaving, muscles trembling. Vince groaned from where he knelt, but Elena, shaking, terrified, stood between him and the fallen knife drain, blocking his path. "You come any closer," she warned, her voice breaking but strong, "and I swear to God, Vince, you'll regret it." He froze, chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. But his eyes, those calculating eyes, shifted past Elena toward the hallway leading to the utility closet. Sophie. Maria saw the flicker of recognition move across his expression. He was going for the girl. Before he could move, Maria bolted. Her legs were weak, her breath battered, but adrenaline propelled her like a shot fired from a trembling hand. She sprinted past Elena, past the broken dishes, past the smoking pans. She burst into the hallway, just as Sophie cracked open the closet door, tears streaming down her face. "Maria!" she cried. "I heard yelling, I'm scared." Maria didn't waste a second. She scooped Sophie into her arms and ran back toward the kitchen. But the kitchen was no longer safe. Vince had broken free of Elena's grasp. He shoved her aside as he lunged toward the hallway. Elena stumbled into Marco, who caught her, both of them collapsing in a tangle of fear and exhaustion. "Give me the girl," Vince roared. Maria tightened her hold on Sophie and bolted toward the only place she knew Vince wouldn't follow if things went wrong, the rear of the kitchen, where the fire alarm system hung on the wall near the exit. Her footsteps slipped on oil, skidded on pans, but she kept running. Sophie's sobs punched through her chest like small, desperate fists. Vince was close. She could hear him. Heavy steps, breath ragged, pure rage fueling him. Maria reached the rear wall. The fire alarm lever gleamed red under the fluorescent lights. She knew exactly what she had to do. Sophie cried out as Maria pushed her gently behind her and reached for the alarm. Vince saw it too late. "No!" he roared, lunging forward. He grabbed her shoulder and flung her backward. Maria hit the wall hard, pain ripping through her ribs. Sophie screamed. Vince reached for the girl. And Maria saw red, bright, scorching red, not from the alarm, but from the fire igniting inside her. She threw herself at him again, fingers clawing, fighting with every shred of strength left in her battered body. Vince swore, batting her away like an insect, but she latched onto his arm, biting down as hard as she could. He screamed in pain. His grip on Sophie loosened, and Maria, heart roaring, blood pounding, lunged for the fire alarm lever. Her fingers closed around it. She pulled. The sound erupted like the sky, cracking open. Wail, wail, wail. The sprinkler system burst to life, drenching the kitchen in a freezing downpour. Flames hissed out. The air filled with mist. People screamed. Customers fled the dining room. Water hammered onto the tiles. Vince froze, stunned. Sophie ran to Maria, clinging to her waist. The front door burst open. 2 security guards from the bar next door rushed inside, followed by 3 customers brave or foolish, enough to help. "There he is," Marco shouted, pointing at Vince. He tried to kidnap the kid. That was all it took. The guards tackled Vince to the ground, pinning it with their full weight as he struggled, cursing, spitting water from the sprinklers. The rough man tried to crawl away, but another customer grabbed him, forcing him down until a guard restrained him too. Sirens wailed outside. Police stormed in moments later. And in that explosive flood of uniforms and shouting and the chaotic spray of sprinklers, Maria collapsed onto her knees, holding Sophie as tightly as if letting go would shatter the world. Elena ran to them through the rain-like spray. She fell beside Maria, pulling both of them into an embrace that trembled with terror and relief. Her voice choked and broke as she murmured over and over, "My baby, Maria, my God, thank you, thank you." Maria couldn't speak, but she held them both, shaking so hard she could barely keep upright. Her wet hair clung to her face. Her lungs burned. Her arms ached. But Sophie was safe, and that was all that mattered. The sprinklers continued pouring down as the police cuffed Vince and his accomplice, dragging them out into the night. Customers gathered in wet clusters, murmuring in shock. Staff members leaned against counters, exhausted and trembling. Maria sank to the floor, cradling Sophie one last time before Elena pulled the girl into her own arms. "Maria," Elena whispered, cupping her face with shaking hands. "You saved my daughter. You saved all of us." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you." Maria's own tears mixed with the sprinkler water as she leaned into Elena's touch. She closed her eyes and breathed, truly breath, for the first time that night. But in the back of her mind, beneath the relief, something else stirred. This wasn't over yet, because as the police dragged Vince past her, he lifted his head, bloody, bruised, and beaten, but still full of venom. His voice cut through the chaos, hoarse and hateful. "This isn't the end." Maria stiffened. The sprinklers continued their relentless downpour. The kitchen steamed. The night pulsed with danger that had not yet fully died. The fire alarm finally fell silent. Not all at once, not as a clean stop, but in stuttering drops, like a dying heartbeat losing its rhythm. The sprinklers, too, began to taper off, going from a torrential downpour to a stubborn dripping that echoed to the battered kitchen. Steam rose from the soaked burners like ghosts ascending from the metal. The floor glistened under harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting fractured silhouettes of the people still standing, shaken, drenched, trembling from adrenaline and shock. Maria remained kneeling, water pooling around her knees. Sophie clung to Elena now, small hands clenched tightly in her mother's blouse, sobbing into her stomach. Elena held her daughter with one arm. The other wrapped around Maria's shoulders, as if afraid both of them would vanish as she let go. Outside the kitchen door, the restaurant buzzed with panicked voices. Customers murmured. Servers tried to calm them. Police radios crackled. But inside the kitchen, this epicenter of chaos, time seemed suspended. Every breath felt heavy, reverberating against the metal counters and dripping pans. Marco stood a few feet away from the three of them, soaked to the bone, face bruised, apron torn. But his eyes were locked on Maria, filled with awe, disbelief, and something deeper, respect, maybe even guilt. He'd always assumed she was quiet because she was weak. But now he looked at her like someone seeing a blade for the first time, silent, sharp, and terrifyingly strong. One of the officers approached Elena with a clipboard. "Ma'am, we're going to need a statement from you." Elena nodded numbly, smoothing Sophie's hair. Yes, of course." The officer paused, looking at Maria, and from her too, the mute girl. "We'll need to know what she saw." Maria's jaw tightened slightly, not from fear of police, but from the realization that she had to relive every moment, frame by frame. Elena felt her flinch and squeeze her shoulder gently. "We'll help her," Elena said firmly, almost offensively. "I'll help translate." The officer nodded and stepped back. Maria lifted her head. Across the kitchen, officers dragged Vince and the rough man out through the alley door. The metal cuffs clanked against their wrists, their soaked clothes slapping wetly against the tile as two officers forced them forward. The rough man was half conscious, mumbling curses. But Vince was entirely awake. He twisted his head just enough to look at Maria one last time. There was hatred in his eyes, pure, undiluted, but there was something else too. Not fear, not anger, something colder, something calculating. The look of a man who still believed he hadn't lost. This isn't the end. The words echoed inside Maria's mind as the officers shoved him out into the frigid night. A strange stillness followed their departure. The kind of stillness that didn't soothe. It stung. It made every bruise sharper, every exhausted breath heavier. It made the questions louder. Why Sophie? Why tonight? Why Vince? Maria looked at Sophie, her messy hair, her tear-stained cheeks, her trembling shoulders. The little girl had always been sunshine. What kind of darkness wanted to steal light like hers? A paramedic approached Elena. "Ma'am, do you or your daughter need medical attention? Anyone injured?" Elena shook her head, just shaken. "But we're okay." The paramedic turned to Maria. Are you all right?" Maria raised her hand, palm up, then rotated it. A universal gesture of, "I'm fine." But the tremble in her fingers betrayed her. The paramedic's gaze softened. "Shock can hit later," he said. "If you feel dizzy or faint, sit down." Maria nodded. He left her with a thin blanket, which she draped around her shoulders. It felt strange. She'd spent the last hour drenched in cold water and adrenaline, but the moment the danger left, she realized just how violently her body shook. Elena knelt beside her, cupping her face. "Maria," her voice cracked as tears spilled down her cheeks again. "You saved my daughter. You saved me. I don't know how. God, I don't know how to thank you." Maria shook her head quickly. She lifted a hand and signed with deliberate care despite her trembling fingers. She needed help. Anyone would have done it. Elena's laugh came out broken, shaky. No, not anyone. Look around." She gestured at the staff, the customers peeking through the door. Everyone was scared. You were too. But you moved. You fought. Her voice broke entirely. "You risked your life." Maria swallowed hard and lowered her eyes. She didn't fight for heroism. She fought because a small girl trusted her without fear. She fought because silence didn't mean helplessness. She fought because she had once been 8 years old and terrified and alone, and no one had come for her. Sophie crawled onto Maria's lap, arms wrapping around her neck. "Maria," she whispered, hiccuping through tears. "Don't ever leave, please?" Maria hugged her back, burying her face in the girl's hair. Her shoulders shook, not with fear this time, but with relief. Sophie's heartbeat pressed against her chest like a small, warm reminder that she had done something that mattered. But relief didn't last. Two detectives entered the kitchen, their long coats dripping water onto the tile as they surveyed the damage. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm, controlled demeanor, approached Elena. "Ms. Rossi?" "Detective Hale." Elena wiped her face, nodded. "I'm sorry to approach you so soon," Detective Hale continued softly, "but we need to ask some questions about Vince Russo." Elena stiffened. Maria looked up sharply. "Questions?" Elena echoed. "Mr. Russo?" The detective exchanged a glance with her partner. "He's connected to a larger investigation." Elena clutched Sophie instinctively. Marco stepped closer, concern written across his bruised face. The dishwasher froze mid-step. Everyone seemed to hold their breath. Detective Hale continued, voice dropping. "We believe he's part of a criminal network operating across multiple states. Kidnappings for debt repayment, relocation threats, extortion. And we believe tonight wasn't random." The air thickened, heavy as the smoke that had clouded moments before. Maria's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" Elena whispered. The detective glanced toward the alley door. "It means Sophie wasn't chosen by chance." A tremor rippled through Elena. She hugged Sophie tighter. Maria felt the floor tilt under her. Her fingers curled against the blanket. Her thoughts raced. Vince watching Sophie for weeks. The stranger scanning the restaurant. The coded conversations in the alley. The car waiting. It aligned now. A puzzle assembling itself in her mind. Detective Hale turned toward Maria. "You work here, correct?" She paused. "We're told you can't speak?" Maria nodded, straightening her spine despite every ache in her body. "We'd like to know what you witnessed," the detective said gently. Elena touched Maria's hand. "You don't have to do it right now. We can—" Maria shook her head firmly. She needed to do this. She needed to make sure Vince never came near Sophie again, even if it meant reliving every terrifying second. Detective Hale handed her a notepad and pen. Maria stared at it for a moment. The simplicity of writing felt monumental after so much violence. She began scribbling, her handwriting hurried, uneven. She described the voices she heard, the alley threat, the plan to take Sophie, the moment in the cooler. As she wrote, her mind replayed every image. Vince's expression, the rough man's blade, Sophie's scream. She felt the cold tiles under her feet, the weight of Vince's grip on her throat, the burst of sparks against her skin. By the time she finished, tears blurred her vision. She blinked them away and handed the notepad back. Detective Hale read quickly, eyes narrowing. "This aligns with what we suspected." "Suspected?" Elena echoed sharply. "You knew he was dangerous?" "We had reason," Hale said, "but not enough proof to make an arrest. We didn't expect him to act so soon." Elena's face crumpled. Maria reached for her, squeezing her hand, offering silent comfort. The detective closed her notebook. "You did everything right tonight. You saved lives." Maria looked away. Her breath hitched. She didn't feel like a savior. She felt like someone who had barely held everything together with shaking hands. But Sophie was safe. That was enough. For now. Detective Hale kneeled at eye level with Maria. "I know you're exhausted. I'm sorry to ask this." She hesitated. "But we need to know. Did Vince say anything else? Anything about where the girl was being taken?" Maria closed her eyes. A flicker resurfaced. Vince whispering in the alley, the rough man grumbling, the words floating like echoes through frost. The car's set. The alley's clear. Straight out of the city. She'll be gone before the mom knows. Maria's eyes snapped open. She grabbed the notepad again, scribbling quickly. They were taking her out of Brooklyn. Immediately, before anyone noticed, Detective Hale inhaled sharply. Then they weren't working alone. There's someone waiting for them. Someone who didn't get caught tonight. Elena stepped back, holding Sophie closer. "So, Sophie's still in danger." Hale didn't answer immediately. And that silence was answer enough. The world seemed to tilt again. Maria felt her pulse spike. Sophie buried her face in Elena's shoulder. Detective Hale stood. "We'll station officers outside your home. We'll patrol the area. But until we locate every member of that ring, yes, we have to assume the threat isn't gone." Maria's fingers tightened around the blanket, so hard it nearly tore. Her silence felt heavier than ever, a weight pressing against her ribs. The detective softened her voice. "But you're not alone. Not anymore. And we are going to catch the rest of them." The moment the detectives left to secure the alley, the kitchen seemed to collapse into quiet chaos. Officers took pictures. Staff whispered. Customers quietly filtered outside, shaking off water and fear. The restaurant no longer smelled like garlic and basil. It smelled like smoke, scorched oil, and something intangible, trauma. An hour passed before the building was declared safe enough to re-enter, more before the last officers left. And when they finally did, Elena, Marco, the dishwasher, Sophie, and Maria were left behind in a broken kitchen, drenched, exhausted, and forever changed. Elena sank onto a stool. She pulled Sophie into her lap and motioned for Maria to sit too. When Maria hesitated, Elena grabbed her wrist and tugged her gently into the circle of warmth. They sat together in silence, the kind of silence that didn't isolate, but bound. A silence that said everything words couldn't. Marco approached, awkward and uncertain. "Maria," he cleared his throat. I'm sorry. I should have noticed something was off. I should have." Maria shook her head, offering a tired smile. She raised her hands and signed slowly. "You helped. You protected Sophie too." Marco blinked hard. "You're the bravest person I've ever seen." Maria dropped her gaze, cheeks warming despite the cold. But the warmth didn't last. Elena stood abruptly, pacing the length of the kitchen. Why Sophie? Why my daughter? What did they want with her? No one knew. But the question lodged itself in the room like a splinter. Where words failed, terror filled the void. Sophie looked at Maria. "Will he come back?" Maria swallowed and shook her head, but she couldn't meet the girl's eyes. Not fully, because Vince's parting threat still echoed inside her skull like a drumbeat. This isn't the end. As the night deepened and the restaurant emptied, Maria sat alone near the sink, staring at the scorch marks on the stove. The overhead lights flickered. Water dripped into a bucket someone had placed under a broken sprinkler head. Her hands were still trembling. Her ribs hurt where Vince had slammed her. Her cheek throbbed from the hit. But pain was distant compared to the unrest twisting inside her. Something else was happening. Something bigger than what she'd seen tonight. Vince was only a piece of the darkness. A soldier. A pawn. A face. The real threat had not yet shown itself. Maria closed her eyes, breathing deeply. The quiet kitchen suddenly felt too open, too vulnerable. She could almost sense danger hovering outside the walls like a gathering storm. She thought of Sophie, small, warm, precious, and fear coiled through her chest. She had saved her once. But could she do it again? Could she keep her safe if more men came? If someone else was watching? If the night wasn't done with them? She stood, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, and walked toward the front of the restaurant. Elena and Sophie were sitting in a booth, Sophie asleep in her mother's arms. Elena stroked her hair, eyes red and puffy. She looked up at Maria and managed a soft, exhausted smile. "We're going home," she whispered. "The police will follow us. And I'd like you to come, at least tonight. I don't want you alone." Maria hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, but the truth lodged itself hard inside her ribs. She didn't want to be alone either. Elena reached out a hand. "Please." Maria took it. The three of them stepped out into the icy Brooklyn night. The snow fell softly now, dusting their hair and coats. Maria glanced over her shoulder once, just once, toward the dark alley where it had all begun. The shadows there seemed deeper than before. Snow whispered against the windows of Elena's townhouse, the fragile flakes tapping softly like timid fingers seeking warmth. The house, quaint and narrow like many Brooklyn brownstones, glowed with yellow lamplight as if trying to ward off the cold uncertainty surrounding it. A police cruiser idled quietly across the street, its presence steady and silent, a barrier against whatever shadows still lingered in the night. Maria stepped inside behind Elena and gently closed the door. Her muscles ached and every breath felt heavy, but the warmth of the living room wrapped around her like a fragile blanket. Sophie, still asleep in Elena's arms, stirred only faintly, her soft curls sticking to her mother's coat. "Come in," Elena whispered, her voice frayed. "Make yourself at home." Home. Maria hesitated. The word felt too large, too weighty. She had not belonged to any home in years. Not since her mother died, not since she fled memories too sharp to hold. But she stepped forward anyway, drawn by the softness in Elena's voice and the glow of the kitchen light that seeped into the hallway like a quiet invitation. Elena laid Sophie down on the couch and gently tucked a blanket around her. She brushed the girl's hair back, lingering a moment with trembling fingers, the fragile gesture of a mother who had nearly lost everything. When she finally turned to Maria, her eyes glistened again. "Let's sit," she said softly. Maria nodded and followed her to the small dining table in the corner. Elena poured 2 cups of chamomile tea, though Maria could barely lift hers. Her hand shook too much. She set the cup down and folded her fingers in her lap. For a long moment, they said nothing. The house hummed faintly with the sound of a radiator warming old pipes. Outside, the police car's engine vibrated in a low, steady rhythm, and between them sat the unspoken truth. Fear, grief, gratitude, and something else Maria couldn't name. "Maria," Elena finally whispered, "I need to know, what gave you the strength to fight the way you did?" Maria's throat tightened. Her fingers trembled as she lifted her hands to sign. But after only one gesture, her hands froze. They fell back into her lap. She had no words, not even in gestures, for the fear that thundered inside her, nor for the desperate need to protect a child who had become her fragile, unexpected anchor in the world. So she looked up instead, letting her eyes speak. Elena watched, breath-catching, understanding blooming in her gaze. "You cared for her," Elena murmured. "You cared enough to risk your life." Maria swallowed hard and nodded once. Elena reached across the table and gently squeezed Maria's hand. "I will never forget what you did. Never." Maria's eyes softened as she returned the squeeze. But before either woman could speak again, Sophie stirred in the living room. A small cry escaped her, a sound tangled with exhaustion and leftover fear. Maria instinctively rose. Elena followed her to the couch, where Sophie blinked awake, disoriented and trembling. "Mama?" she whispered. Elena knelt beside her. "I'm here, darling. You're safe." Sophie looked around frantically until her gaze found Maria. She reached out instantly. "Maria, don't go." Maria knelt beside her and placed a hand over the girl's small fingers. Sophie grasped it tightly, clinging to her like a lifeline. Elena watched them, something shifting deep in her expression, an understanding, a realization, a decision. "Maria," she said quietly, "you don't have to leave. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not until you feel safe. This house, this family, you're part of it, if you want to be." Maria stared at her, stunned. She felt warmth blooming inside her chest, unfamiliar and almost frightening. Belonging wasn't something she had allowed herself to imagine. Not after a childhood of doors closing, cities drifting by, and people growing tired of trying to understand someone who had no voice. But here, in this dimly lit living room, belonging didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt like a small girl clinging to her hand. It felt like Elena's tired but gentle eyes. It felt like the steady hum of a house, still standing after the storm. Maria nodded slowly. Elena smiled through tears. "Then stay. Please." Maria sat beside Sophie until the girl's breathing evened out again. At some point, Elena placed another blanket over Maria's shoulders. The house dimmed as lamps were switched off one by one. And for the first time since the evening descended into violence, the world felt safe, if only in this little corner. Hours passed. Or maybe only minutes. Time blurred. Near dawn, Maria found herself awake on the couch. Sophie curled against her side, one small hand still tangled in the fabric of Maria's sleeve. Elena had fallen asleep in an armchair nearby, exhaustion pulling her into a heavy slumber. Maria listened to the quiet, soft, fragile, real, the kind that seeped into her bones and soothed the tremor beneath her skin. This wasn't the silence of emptiness she'd known most of her life. This was a silence full of breath, of warmth, of meaning. Her thoughts drifted to Vince, dragged away, face twisted with hate, but his shadow felt distant now, swallowed by the weight of police cruiser outside and the comfort of this house. She looked at Sophie again. Sophie stirred slightly, mumbling in her sleep. Without waking, she scooted closer, pressing her cheek against Maria's arm. Maria exhaled softly, a breath that trembled with something deeper than relief. She would never let anyone hurt this child again. Not Vince, not whoever was behind him, not even fate if she could help it. She brushed a strand of hair from Sophie's forehead and gently traced the girl's cheek with her thumb. The child relaxed, sinking deeper into sleep. Maria leaned back into the couch cushions and allowed herself a rare moment. One where she was a fugitive from her past, a mute girl overlooked by the world, a ghost in someone else's story. Tonight, she was Maria, Sophie's protector, Elena's anchor, a survivor who had turned silence into power. Outside, the sky slowly brightened. A pale blue glow spread across the horizon, the first hint of dawn washing away the harsh edge of night. Snow continued to fall, but now it glittered beneath the early light. Soft, forgiving, like the world offering her a second chance. Maria closed her eyes and let herself breathe, not in fear, not in grief, but in something tender, something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. When she opened her eyes again, the room was brighter. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting gold shapes on the walls. Sophie had shifted in her sleep, now curled against Elena's side. The police car still stood outside, guardian-like, but quieter, less ominous. Maria sat up slowly, stretching her aching limbs. But the ache no longer felt sharp. It felt earned, like proof of a night she had survived. She rose and moved to the kitchen, careful not to wake the others. The early light made the small space glow, painting warm hues across the cabinets. She filled a kettle, set it on the stove, and waited. When the water began to heat, she leaned against the counter and let the warmth seep into her hands. She was alive. Sophie was alive. Elena was alive. The world hadn't ended in fire. It had begun anew. Footsteps approached softly behind her. She turned to find Elena standing in the doorway, eyes still puffy but warm. "You're up?" Elena murmured. Maria nodded. Elena walked over and placed a hand on her arm. "Thank you again. For staying. For everything." Maria shook her head gently, signing with soft, slow movements. "You don't need to thank me. I wanted to be here." Elena blinked, tears brimming again, but this time not from fear. "Then please know you're welcome here. Always." Maria lowered her eyes, fighting the sting in her chest. Elena squeezed her arm. "You don't have to go back to being alone." Maria lifted her gaze, meeting Elena's. Slowly, she raised her hand and pressed it to her heart, then extended it toward Elena and Sophie sleeping on the couch. Her own version of a vow. Elena nodded through tears. "Yes," she whispered. "We're family now." The kettle whistled softly. Together, the two women poured tea, moving around the kitchen in a quiet dance that needed no words. The sun climbed higher, warming the wooden floors. The smell of chamomile drifted through the air, gentle and soothing. In the living room, Sophie stirred again, rubbing her eyes before spotting Maria. She smiled, sleepy and pure. "Maria," she whispered, voice scratchy from tears and sleep. "Are you still here?" Maria crossed the room and knelt before her. She nodded. Sophie threw her arms around her neck. And in that small, heartfelt embrace, soft as snow, warm as dawn, Maria felt something settle inside her, something she had never dared to hope for. A sense of belonging, a sense of home, a sense of future. The storm had passed. The danger had been real, sharp, terrifying, but it had also led her here, to warmth, to acceptance, to a family forged not by blood but by choice and courage. Maria closed her eyes and held Sophie close, letting the moment sink into her bones like sunlight. Her silence had always been her burden. But today, it was her strength, her story, her voice. And in this living room, wrapped in morning light and the heartbeat of a child who trusted her completely, that silence finally felt like enough. Like peace, like home, like an ending that wasn't an ending at all, but a beginning.